Pull up a chair, friends. Not that kind of pulling, though we'll get to that before long. Come in close. Because I want to tell you about a woman who understood, in the space of a single breath, exactly what was being done to her, and decided that the correct response to a small humiliation was not to become a smaller person. Her name was Clara Dunmore. She was 27 years old, the daughter of a country solicitor from Dorset who had died 18 months prior, leaving her his library and very little else. She had come to Pemberton Hall in Yorkshire as a paid companion to Lady Agatha Smythe, Lady Pemberton's widowed aunt, engaged, as Lady Pemberton had put it in her letter, to provide a sensible, unobtrusive young woman who understands the nature of her position. Clara had understood it perfectly. She understood it, now, standing on the stone terrace in the thin September light, listening to Lady Pemberton explain the arrangement for the evening's supper procession. The guests would enter the supper room in pairs, ranked by precedence. Lord and Lady Whitmore would lead, then the Carrington family, then the Ashford cousins, and their connections, descending in tidy social order toward the doors of the supper tent. Lady Agatha, whose gout had confined her to her room since Thursday, would not attend. Clara, who had been engaged specifically to accompany her, had no natural pairing within the procession. She would, Lady Pemberton explained, with the pleasant efficiency of a woman who has arranged things precisely, wait until the guests had entered, then come in quietly, through the side. Clara said, "Of course, Lady Pemberton." Lady Pemberton moved away satisfied. She was a woman who found satisfaction in arrangements that worked out as planned, and this one had. Clara turned back toward the terrace and thought she put a great deal of care into that. She had been at Pemberton Hall 6 weeks, long enough to learn the household with the specific attention of a person who understands that knowledge is the only currency available to someone in her position. She knew that Lady Pemberton's eldest daughter, Charlotte, was kind and clever, and rather wasted on the drawing-room programs her mother arranged for her. She knew that the kitchen garden was the one place on the estate no one came looking for her, and that its keeper, Sir Reginald Forsyth, a retired admiral and distant relation of the estate's original family, who had declined to vacate the cottage at the garden's eastern edge when the Pembertons acquired the property, had opinions about that garden he'd been developing for 40 years and hadn't been asked to share in something like 30. She had asked him on her second morning. He looked up from the potato bed, with the expression of a man who has heard something he wasn't expecting and had been waiting for it for 3 decades. "You actually want to know," he said. "I would like nothing better," she said. He began immediately and didn't really stop. He was 81, hard of hearing in his right ear, and very good company. Clara took her morning tea in the kitchen garden most days after that, and heard a great deal about potatoes, and about his years in the Pacific, and about his wife Margaret, dead 12 years now, who had, by his account, been the finest judge of character he'd ever encountered. "She would have liked you," he told Clara one Tuesday. "I would have liked to know her," Clara said. She meant it. Now, friends, I should tell you about Lord Alderton, because this story needs him. He deserves a proper introduction. Hugh Alderton, the Earl of Alderton, was 35, distantly related to Lord Pemberton, and had accepted the autumn house party invitation in a moment of social obligation he'd been mildly, philosophically regretting since roughly the first evening. He wasn't an unpleasant man. He was, if anything, a thoughtful one. He simply found large gatherings of people performing at one another, exhausting in a way that grew more pronounced every year, and had spent most of the house stay so far in the library, or walking the grounds with the look of a man attending an event, while also somehow not attending it. He noticed Clara Dunmore on the first evening, not in the way Lady Pemberton might have anticipated, requiring careful seating arrangements, but in the way he noticed things that didn't fit the expected pattern. She had come in to fetch Lady Agatha's forgotten shawl and moved through the drawing room with a particular quality of attention, as though reading the space the way one reads a letter, taking in the meaning beneath the words. She hadn't tried to be invisible. She hadn't tried to be noticed. She had simply moved through the room being exactly what she was, a person in full possession of herself. Then she was gone. Lord Alderton looked at Lady Pemberton's careful arrangement of the room, then at the door Clara had gone through, and thought, with the slow interest of a man who hadn't found much interesting in several days. She saw all of this in under a minute. He kept being curious about that. He watched her at meals. She dined mostly with Lady Agatha, but appeared at the communal luncheon, and noticed a quality he couldn't immediately name. She was genuinely engaged with whatever was in front of her, not performing engagement, not managing the appearance of interest. When conversation at the lower end of the luncheon table turned to him, as it eventually always did, she didn't look up with the particular eagerness of someone spotting an opportunity. She looked up because she was paying attention. That was different. He found he wanted to know what she thought about things. He hadn't wanted to know that about anyone in some time. The afternoon of the supper procession, there was a lawn party. Croquet, tea, the practiced performance of a well-managed autumn gathering. Bright sky, good Madeira, Lady Pemberton circling the lawn with the contentment of a woman whose arrangements are proceeding correctly. Clara stood near the east garden wall, where Sir Reginald had been settled into his chair in a patch of afternoon sun by a footman who knew he liked it there. She was telling him about a letter from a Dorset friend describing a bad year for apples. And he was telling her that apples depended a great deal on the drainage of the lower field, and that most people simply didn't understand this. Lord Alderton, some 30 feet off, with a glass of Madeira he wasn't much drinking, was watching the conversation with the interest he'd been cultivating toward Clara Dunmore for 3 days. It was Lady Whitmore who interrupted the afternoon, a woman of impeccable social position and imprecise information, a combination that can do a great deal of damage at a lawn party. Standing at the center of the croquet lawn, in a voice pitched to Carrie, she said she'd heard something rather interesting about Miss Dunmore's father, the solicitor. Some difficulty, she believed. A matter of funds. Not a formal accusation, she clarified, with the smile of a woman who knows that clarifying makes the wound go deeper. Just something a very reliable source had mentioned. Questions about the management of the Halcott estate funds, whether Miss Dunmore's father had been entirely above reproach. The lawn went very still. Clara set down her teacup with the composure of a woman who has taken a blow, assessed its exact damage, and decided that silence is not the answer. She knew the truth of the Halcott matter because she'd lived through it. Her father had managed those funds for 16 years. The questions Lady Whitmore was describing had been raised by a disgruntled beneficiary in the spring of 1834, and formally cleared by August of that same year. Clara knew the date because she'd copied the letter of exoneration into the ledger herself, 2 days before her mother's birthday, while waiting for the post. She said across the lawn, in the clear, level voice of someone offering a factual correction, "I believe Lady Whitmore may be thinking of a different matter." The Halcott question was raised in the spring of 1834, and cleared entirely by Mr. Aldous Crane that August. I have the correspondence in Dorset. The finding was that my father's accounts were impeccable. She paused. I would not want an incorrect account to circulate about a man who is no longer here to correct it himself. The lawn produced a silence. 30 people absorbing a correction delivered without heat, without tears, without a single word more than necessary. Lady Whitmore recomposed her expression with the speed of long practice. How interesting, she said pleasantly, that the companion keeps such thorough records. The lawn began, in the slow collective way of gatherings, to decide which direction to go. Before it could arrive, Lord Alderton put down his glass. And friends, pay attention here, because this is the part that matters. He walked the full length of the lawn, not toward Lady Whitmore, not toward the house. Past Lady Pemberton, gone very still, past the Carringtons, past every guest of the Pemberton autumn party, all turning to watch him, straight to the east garden wall, where Clara stood beside Sir Reginald's chair. He stopped beside her. "Good afternoon, Sir Reginald," he said, perfectly composed. "I hear the lower beds have had a remarkable season." Sir Reginald, who had heard neither Lady Whitmore's remark nor Clara's reply, nor the silence aft, on account of his right ear, and a general absorption in the drainage question, looked up with the pleasure of a man who has been sought out. "Alderton, I was just telling Miss Dunmore about the beds. No one asks about the beds." "I am asking," Lord Alderton said. He did not look at the rest of the lawn. He was, Clara understood, entirely aware of it. He stayed the whole afternoon. "If you've been with this story from the start, friends, and I know you have, because you're the kind of people who stay for the whole story, rest here a moment. This is where it changes shape. It began with a woman being put in her place, and it arrives here, in the late September, sun beside an old admiral's chair, with a hazard that watching someone placed at the edge of the room is not something he can do from the center of it. If you find yourself wanting more of this kind of story, told quietly, about people who do the right thing when no one's asked them to, I'd love to have you back for the next one. A subscription costs nothing, and it means the next story finds you. Now, back to the terrace, where the supper procession was about to begin. Lady Pemberton had recovered from the lawn with the speed of a woman who has managed 30 years of social events, and knows a quick recovery is the best kind. She'd had a quiet word with Lady Whitmore, who had received it without enthusiasm. The guests assembled on the terrace as the September evening came in blue over the gardens. The procession formed by precedence. Lord and Lady Whitmore leading, the Carringtons and Ashfords behind them. Lord Alderton, as the evening's most senior unattached guest, was placed near the head of it, paired by Lady Pemberton's arrangement with Miss Carrington. He looked at the line ahead of him. He looked at Miss Carrington, pleasant and entirely uninterested in anything but the arrangement itself. Then he looked to the very back, where the path turned toward the supper tent, and where Clara Dunmore stood alone at the side, precisely where Lady Pemberton had arranged for her to stand. "Please excuse me a moment," he said quietly to Miss Carrington, and stepped out of the procession. Lady Pemberton's head turned. She wore the expression, Clara would think later, of a woman watching a plan depart from its course with no way left to correct it. He walked the full length of the line, past the Whitmores, the Carringtons, the Ashfords, every guest turning to watch, to the side door, to Clara. He offered his arm. "Miss Dunmore, would you do me the honor?" Clara looked at him, at his arm, at the 30 guests who'd turned to watch, and at Lady Pemberton's face, which had become the face of a woman for whom the evening had just grown significantly more complicated. Lord Alderton, the procession. "We'll proceed," he said, "and we will follow it. I had rather walk in last than walk in incorrectly." She looked at him a long moment. Then she took his arm. They walked in last, behind every guest, behind the arrangement, into the warm light of the supper tent, where 30 people were finding their seats and pretending, with varying success, not to have seen what they'd just seen. Sir Reginald, brought in earlier by the side door in his chair, looked up with great satisfaction. "Alderton, you found Miss Dunmore. Excellent. She was about to tell me more of the Dorset harvest and we were interrupted." "Then we shall continue now," Lord Alderton said, and sat down. The supper rearranged itself around the new geometry of the evening, the way rooms do when the most considerable person present has indicated, without a speech, what he intends to think. Lady Pemberton presided with the composure of a woman managing a situation that has developed a will of its own, practical beneath the social conviction, already revising her calculations for the days ahead. Clara performed nothing. She sat beside Lord Alderton and Sir Reginald, ate her supper, and talked about drainage and the Pacific crossing of 1801, which the Admiral had made as a young officer, and described with the vividness of a story kept carefully for 60 years. Lord Alderton listened with the same quality of attention she'd first noticed across a room 3 days before. Not attention performed for her benefit, she understood now, but simply his nature, turned toward them. She tried not to find this as significant as it was. She was not entirely successful. After supper, in the gallery, the evening restored itself to drawing-room propriety with the speed of well-trained guests who understand that the purpose of an after-dinner gathering is to smooth over whatever happened at dinner. Clara excused herself at 9:30. Her position didn't require the full evening, and Lady Agatha would want her report. She was on the back staircase when she heard him. "Miss Dunmore." He came down the corridor with the directness of a man who has decided what to say and isn't going to manage the approach. "The Whitmore remark," he said. "It will not stand. Your account was specific and well-sourced. Lady Whitmore is a woman of position, but not of particular accuracy, and the room knows the difference." "She knows it now," Clara said. "Thank you." "I didn't do much." "You stayed the whole afternoon," she said. "Sir Reginald hadn't had company at that wall in some time, he told me." She paused. "You did more than you think." "Your father," he said. "I heard what you said about the Halcott correspondence, that he's no longer here to correct it himself." She went very still. "He died 18 months ago," she said, "before any arrangement could be made for my situation. I arranged myself." She said it plainly, without apology. He thought an education put to use was better than one merely displayed. He wasn't wrong, though the applications turned out rather different than he expected. What did he expect? She considered it. A household, a marriage, a life within the expected order of things. He was practical, but he anticipated a different kind of practicality. "And instead you have the kitchen garden," Lord Alderton said, with a warmth she'd been trying to name correctly since the lawn party. "And very good information about potato drainage," she said. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but the thing that contains one and is more considered. "I walked in last tonight," he said. "I'd like not to be last in asking whether I might call on you tomorrow." She thought of the arm, the 30 watching guests, Sir Reginald's face when Lord Alderton sat down beside him. "I have my morning with Sir Reginald at 8, she said. "After 10. "After 10, he said. She went up the stairs. The drawing-room carried on below, and neither of them was in it. Which was, in the end, the most telling thing about the evening. He called at 10:10. Lady Pemberton, by that hour, had installed herself in the front drawing-room, with the air of a woman intending to be present, which Clara had anticipated, and so had spent the morning in the small room where the household correspondence and Lady Agatha's affairs were managed, precisely where her duties placed her when his card arrived. He was shown in. He took the chair across from the writing table, nearer to where she worked, and didn't seem to find the arrangement irregular. He looked at the shelves of correspondence, at Lady Agatha's lesson books, at the window that faced the kitchen garden. "Sir Reginald tells me," he said, "that you've corrected the Latin name he's had wrong for a rhododendron variety for 11 years. My father's library had a botanical section," she said. "I spent a good part of my childhood in it." He was delighted. He was embarrassed about the 11 years. He was delighted, Lord Alderton said again with certainty. "I went to the garden this morning at 8:30. He was already there. He has strong opinions about the morning hours as they relate to the beds." She considered this, that he had gone to the kitchen garden at 8:30, the morning after a supper party that had required considerable social management, to talk to an elderly admiral about rhododendrons, instead of appearing at breakfast where the guests assembled. "Lady Pemberton will have noticed you weren't at breakfast," she said. "Lady Pemberton is a woman of precise social intelligence. I expect she's already reached a fairly accurate conclusion about where the morning is going. She will adjust." She will not be pleased. She will adjust, he said, without much concern. Clara looked at the table between them. You understand my position here is precisely what Lady Pemberton has arranged it to appear. I'm a companion to a woman with gout. I dine separately. I enter rooms from the side. Whatever you're doing will complicate my situation in ways it won't complicate yours. I know what I'm doing, he said steadily. I'm calling on a woman I find more interesting than anyone I've spoken to in 3 years and asking whether she'd be willing to speak with me regularly for the rest of this house party. 3 years is a specific number. I'm a specific person. Vagueness costs more in the long run. I have opinions, she said, about estate management, formed from 6 weeks of observation. Lady Pemberton would tell you they aren't relevant opinions. I'd like to hear them. About tenant welfare, too, and about how households treat the people at the edges of their arrangements, which I have some particular experience of. Yes, he said, I'd gathered. Outside the window, the October garden lay quiet. Sir Reginald was moving slowly among the beds in the manner of a man who knows every inch of his own territory. 10 o'clock tomorrow, she said. 10 o'clock. The fortnight that followed was one of careful, incremental honesty. He called every day. He sent a volume on Yorkshire land drainage with a note tucked into the title page, saying he'd found it relevant to an argument she'd made on Tuesday about the Eastern Field, and thought she should have the reference. He joined her and Sir Reginald at the garden wall on 4 separate mornings. At the Pemberton evenings, he was present not as their central figure, but as a man who had chosen where to be and was being there with complete composure. He made no effort to keep his attentions ambiguous, no effort to keep them deniable. He was, Clara understood, being deliberate, and doing it without drama, which she found more unsettling than drama would have been, because it left her nothing to be sensible about. The household recalibrated around it. Charlotte Pemberton, who had always been kinder to Clara than her mother particularly encouraged, began appearing at the morning room door, with questions about correspondence, and sometimes with no stated reason at all, and was welcome every time. The senior housemaid began bringing better tea. Lady Whitmore, who stayed out the house party's duration, was seen in conversation with Lady Pemberton on the subject of the Halcott matter, and emerged from it wearing the look of a woman who has had confirmed something she'd half hoped would not be. Lady Pemberton came to the morning room on a Thursday. She took the chair across from the writing table. Lord Alderton's chair, though she didn't know it, and regarded Clara with the look of a woman who has managed 30 years of drawing rooms, and has, perhaps for the first time, met a situation that has outrun her management. Lord Alderton, she said. Yes. He is of considerable consequence. Yes. His family would require. I know what his family would require, Clara said quietly. I also know what I am in this household, and what I've been since I arrived. I don't think you need to explain either to me, Lady Pemberton. I've understood them since the first week. Something shifted beneath Lady Pemberton's composed expression. Not warmth exactly, but the particular dignity of a woman arriving at a conclusion she hadn't intended to reach. He walked out of the procession, she said. Yes. In 30 years I have not seen a man of his position do that. Clara said nothing. He did not consult me. It wasn't quite a complaint, more the recalibration of a woman who has built her life on arranging things, encountering a factor that will not arrange. No, Clara said, he did not. Lady Pemberton was quiet a long moment. Then, with the economy of a woman who does not offer concessions easily and means them when she does. He may call in the front parlour tomorrow. I'll see that it's available. It was not an apology. It was more than Clara had expected. Thank you, Lady Pemberton. He came on a Wednesday, earlier than his usual hour, which told her everything. The look of a man who has spent 2 weeks thinking carefully and reached the point past which careful thinking is no longer the right mode. He spoke with Lady Pemberton for 20 minutes. Charlotte, who had been listening from the adjacent sitting room, being practical in ways her mother hadn't fully accounted for, told Clara afterward that it had been a thorough conversation, with some resistance in it, the kind 30 years of social conviction required Lady Pemberton to produce, and that it ended the way conversations with Lord Alderton generally did. At the conclusion he'd intended from the start. Then he was shown to the morning room. Clara had known he was coming. Not because anyone told her, but because she'd been paying attention for 2 weeks and understood by now the shape of how he made decisions. He took his chair and looked at her, with the same honest, full attention that had carried consistently from the croquet lawn to the corridor to this room. "Lady Pemberton has agreed to write to your aunt in Dorset," he said. "Your father's sister, I believe, the nearest appropriate family member. She wasn't enthusiastic, but she'll write." "You've been thorough," Clara said. "Thoroughness prevents later difficulties." "You understand," she said carefully, "that I am not a woman who will be managed." I'd gathered that. A correction delivered to a lawn full of people is not the action of a woman waiting to be managed. "I have opinions about the estate, the tenants on the Northfield, how the household staff are spoken to by visiting guests. I've observed all of it, and I will say so." "I'm anticipating it," he said. "I've spent 6 weeks at the edge of this household because my position placed me there," she said, "and I was right to be sensible about it. But sensible about my position isn't the same as sensible about everything, and I find I'm not able to be sensible about one particular subject. Lately." He looked at her with the thing she'd been trying to name since the corridor, and understood now it was simpler than anything he'd called it. It was just him looking at her. "I walked out of that procession," he said, "because Lady Pemberton had put you at the back of it deliberately, and I stood at the front and watched her do it, and found I couldn't stay there. That's the whole of it." He paused. "I'd like not to be at the front while you're at the back, for as long as I have any say in it." Clara looked past him, out at the garden, where Sir Reginald stood in his usual patch of morning sun. She thought of the drainage volume, and the note about the argument she'd made on Tuesday. "Yes," she said. "Yes. To the visiting, to the letter, to whatever comes next." She looked at him. "But I keep the morning hour for Sir Reginald." "I'll join you at 9:30, he said. "He's been asking me about the Latin names for the South Bed varieties. He has 11 years of incorrect labelling to correct." "We have time," Lord Alderton said. She left Pemberton Hall on a Friday morning in November. She took her father's botanical books, his Bible, and the estate correspondence ledger Lady Agatha had given her leave to keep, because the handwriting in it was her father's and she wasn't ready to part with it, and the small watercolour of the Dorset coast that had hung in the morning room since her 3rd week, which Charlotte had pressed on her, saying, "Take it. I want you to have it." Charlotte embraced her in the corridor, with the warmth of 2 women who had become, against the careful architecture of the household, genuinely fond of one another. "Write to me," Charlotte said. "Tell me how Sir Reginald's east bed turns out in spring." "I will, regularly." Lady Pemberton stayed in her sitting room, where she needed to be, Clara thought, managing the morning the only way left available to her. From a distance, with her dignity intact. Clara respected that. She had always found it possible to respect a thing managed correctly, even when it came late. Lord Alderton was at the front door with the carriage. He had come himself. The kind of thing that no longer needed explaining between them. He handed her in, got in beside her, and the carriage moved down the drive, past the kitchen garden wall, past the east gate, out onto the Yorkshire road. She watched Pemberton Hall through the window until it was gone. The terrace where Lady Pemberton had explained the procession, the wall where she'd taken tea for 6 weeks, the morning room window where she'd spent 18 months being sensible, and then 3 weeks deciding not to be. "Sir Reginald gave me a list," Lord Alderton said beside her. "A list?" Varieties he wants us to look into before spring, quite specific. The rhododendron section runs to 4 pages. He included diagrams. He made diagrams. He said you'd know what they meant. She looked out at the bare hedgerows, the grey sky, the road going somewhere that wasn't behind them. I do, she said. I'll explain them to you. I was hoping you would. The carriage moved on, and inside it, 2 people who had found each other at the edge of an arrangement, never meant to introduce them, sat in the uncomplicated ease of a shared direction. The most comfortable thing Clara Dunmore had felt in the better part of 2 years. She thought, he walked out of the procession. She thought, I am glad he did. And perhaps, dear friends, that is what this story is really about. Not the lawn party, or the procession, or the careful arrangements of Pemberton Hall, all real enough in their way, but this, a man at the front of a terrace who looked to the back, and found he could not go on standing at the front, and a woman at the back who had been sensible her whole life, and found, in the space of an offered arm on a September evening, that she had run out of reasons to remain so. He walked out of the procession. Sometimes that is the whole of it. Thank you, dear friends, for sitting with me this evening. If this story found its way to you, and you'd like the next one to find you too, Moonlight at Ashford is always here. A little fire in the evening, a chair drawn close. Until then, take good care of yourselves and each other. Good night.